go. Cannabis. Turns out the Department of Health, 7 years after legalizing marijuana, will mandate warning labels stating cannabis is an addictive drug linked to psychosis, schizophrenia, and brain damage, especially for users under 25 years old. The department in earlier research referred to marijuana as less risky than teenage drinking. Health Canada should reinstate health warning messages that pertain to serious cannabis-related health risks, including the psychosis and schizophrenia, said a January 10th department report. And the health warnings have been updated in 5 years.
I mean, water is wet, Department of Health confirms. I mean, this has been known about now for a very long time, the dangers of cannabis. It was known about when the Liberals legalized it. But as you see here, Dr. Hedy Fry here, the former health critic of the Liberal Party, who said, and this is the Blacklock story, if critics of legalization are so concerned about the risk of these drugs, are they saying that they're going to make tobacco and alcohol illegal? It's inconsistent and illogical. And it's that kind of sophistry that made it possible to legalize cannabis, really. It's that which is just such a brainless, thoughtless take from somebody, and a classic example of how an expert with the title of doctor in front of their name isn't necessarily very smart, because obviously the difference between cannabis and tobacco and alcohol is that tobacco and alcohol have been legal for many years, hundreds of years, whereas cannabis has basically always been illegal, or at least in the last sort of 100 years. So there's a big difference between legalizing something and deciding to decriminalize something like beer. I mean, can you imagine trying to decriminalize beer in this day and age? But I don't know, that's the kind of stupid logic that led this to happen, which is just pure sophistry, like really old-fashioned tricky arguments that don't make sense when you actually think about them. And now here we are, burdened with all kinds of trouble. And cannabis it's the real deal. Like, as they say, psychosis is not a trivial ailment, is it? It's quite a serious thing to suffer from.
Yeah, and those new health warnings, in addition to the psychosis, is psychotic symptoms, cannabis dependency, especially affecting people, young people, and it can worsen your attention, concentration, and memory, especially when using higher strengths. Yeah.
But then you always get, another thing you get is like, there'll always be somebody that pops their head up and it's like, I've been smoking doobs since I was 14 and I'm fine. It's like, yeah, there are people that drink like half a bottle of vodka every day and they're in their 90s and they're fine. Obviously, there are always exceptions to these things. This is about entire populations when studied at that level, at that macro level. And this is like, it's THC, isn't it? That's what's associated with all the bad stuff. And we do know that now. Science has shown.
Sir Elton John, we talked about this in the past. Sir Elton John came out and publicly criticized the legalization of marijuana in Canada and the U.S., calling it one of the greatest mistakes of all time. In a 2024 interview with Time magazine, he expressed concerns about marijuana's addictive potential and its role as a gateway to other drugs, drawing from his own personal experience with substance abuse. Elton John said, I maintain that it's addictive, it leads to other drugs, and when you're stoned, and I've been stoned, you don't think normally. And from my own personal experience, I didn't really ever smoke weed. I think I tried it once, but a lot of my friends were into it when we were younger, and it definitely increased their anxiety all the time. Like, they definitely seem to be really have a lot of anxiety, and I do have a friend right now that partakes quite a bit, and he seems to have higher levels of anxiety than normal, and he takes drugs to counteract his anxiety. And I said to him, stop smoking weed. But
well, it's associated with paranoia, isn't it? And obviously at the extreme end, that can become like schizophrenia, as they say here. But the problem now is, with it having been legalized, it's like, how do you put the toothpaste back in the tube now? I mean, I don't know. I mean, and I'm not sure what Sir Elton had to say about that, but the idea of banning it again just seems that seems implausible now, doesn't it? So it's kind of, once you do something like that, you have to be so certain, don't you? You have to be so sure before you do it. And I think that's why it hasn't happened in other countries, other sort of liberal democracies, like in Europe. I think that's why it's not happened there yet, because people are quite reluctant to to go to that length, because you can't reverse that decision, really.
Justin Trudeau, that's his biggest accomplishment, Bill C-45. And it was legalized in 2018. And it was the second country in the world after Uruguay to legalize recreational cannabis nationwide. And and then we had a bunch of stocks take off. And here's, we got a little chart of some of them here, that the top stocks by market cap and your cannabis growth, which is weed, Aurora Cannabis, Tilray Brands. And then just to demonstrate what's happened with these pot stocks, and I did buy some pot stocks when they first came out, but I sold all my pot stocks on July 1st when it became legal, because I said the story's over. It is now an agriculture stock, and agriculture stocks don't do that well. And here's the chart of weed. There you go. Not so high, if you get the joke or the pun. And then here's Aurora Cannabis. A lot of people that invested big time and then thinking these things are going to run. I'm sure a lot of the liberal MPs loaded up, or maybe the government loaded up. I don't know where they got in or out, but not a great story for many of the people that even bought dispensaries thinking they were going to get rich off of it. And the only people that got rich off of it is all the mining stocks that did reverse takeovers and turned themselves into weed stocks from, like dead resource stocks. There you go.
Yeah, it was a bit of a bonanza, wasn't it? Big weed.
Big weed, yeah. It was the hype. And Justin Trudeau's biggest claim to fame, getting Canada stoned. And now it turns out it's taken away the motivation for lots of young people. There you go.
I think as well, though, something that's a bit, I suppose it's predictable if you look at it from a bird's eye view. But a lot of young people now are actually quite puritanical about drugs and also alcohol, and they've really turned their back on it. So it feels like that kind of libertarian approach that's best sort of encapsulated in a person like Trudeau, Generation X. It seems like the Generation Z, they don't like that. They look at that as that sort of permissiveness as being quite sort of destructive.
Well, there's the best commercial I've ever seen on weed was on TV before it was legalized. And it was two guys sitting up in an attic, and they were probably in their late 30s or early 40s, and they were sitting up there and say they smoked weed, their whole lives, and never really bothered them. And then you hear a lady yell from downstairs, "Billy, are you going to look for a job today?" And he's like, "Get off my back, Mom." It just saps your motivation. There you go.
Yeah, and I just think that its time was kind of the 60s, wasn't it? The 60s and the 70s, when it was, or even the 50s, you could say, when it was kind of, it was like an edgy thing to do, or it was a bit of a rebellious thing to do, and it was very much associated with the counterculture. It almost seems like its time has passed long ago, and yet people are still on it as if it's the coolest thing that's ever happened. That's a little bit cringe, I find.
And I think the most offensive thing, and it stinks like a skunk. Like, it's just so offensive when people smoke it around you. I mean, it's just like holy cow, it stinks. Anyway.
Well, especially since you can get high, can't you? Secondhand highness.
Moving on to our next story, and this thing is starting to heat up. Alberta separatism. This is a Western Standard story. That Smith draws a line in the oil sands, and then she says Carney has till Sunday. And then there's an MP that did a speech there, an Alberta MP, in his maiden speech to the Commons, and he said Westerners would like to rip this place down and rebuild Canada. Alberta separatism is no longer a fringe idea. There you go. And we'll play a small clip of him speaking here. David Bext from Bow River.
Mr. Speaker, it is...
Nope.
That's not an Albertan.
No. We're going to play him later. It's the next one down there. Any chance of getting it? He's going to get it here. But yeah, so That stuff is heating up.
Big time. Well, they've got nothing to... It's almost like Alberta now has just got nothing to lose anymore. Well, it does, but it feels like they've got to the point now where they've just been ignored so many times that it's like, all right, we're going to have to we're going to have to up the ante if we're going to win this.
Let's run this clip here.
Separatism is no longer a fringe idea. I heard it at the doors more times than I can count. And I'll tell you plainly, Alberta staying in Confederation is not up to me, and it's not up to the Liberal government. It's up to the people of Alberta. And the Albertans know that they have options. If this House continues to insult, abuse, and neglect Alberta, if it refuses to treat our people and our industries with the respect that they've earned, then the future of this country is not guaranteed. Alberta separatism is no...
Well, that's good enough, I guess. There you go. And then there's a piece from Holly Doan's Blacklocks, and it's from a Senator, Mark Gold, and saying it's not that easy. He called it a matter of law, but didn't explain how that would be enforced. But he did say that there's Parliament in 2000 passed the Act to give effect to the requirement for clarity as set out in the opinion of the Supreme Court, dubbed the Clarity Act. It requires, that doesn't sound very clear to me, the Clarity Act. It requires the Commons verify the wording.
It's one of the great ironies of that name, isn't it?
It requires the Commons verify the wording of a question to put a referendum to ensure a clear expression of the will of the population of the province, or whether the province should cease to be a part of the Canada and become an independent state. Well, the Clarity Act preamble states the Supreme Court has confirmed there is no right under international law or in the Constitution of Canada for the National Assembly, Legislature, or Government of Quebec to effect secession from Canada unilaterally. So the Clarity Act is not very clear. So Quebec lost that. Quebec lost that vote by a very, very slim margin when they did a referendum twice too, right?
Indeed, they could so easily have won that one in the 90s there. When was it? 95? Was it 95? Yeah, 1995. That one could have easily, that was their moment, wasn't it, when they could have done it.
Chrystia Freeland, friend of the show. Today she was at a virtual meeting, or not today, yesterday, and worked on creating one economy, not 13, making it easier to sell services, blah, 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 blah. Why didn't they do this a long time ago? Like this one just blows me away. And now they're working at it. What were they working on for the past 10 years? That'd be the question of the day.
It's just remarkable, isn't it? Mark Carney's in Ottawa now at the Conference of Municipalities, or whatever they call it. And they're just fawning over him as if he's like a rock star or something like that. It's absolutely pathetic to behold. But he sat there and he's gone on about building houses, and he's talking about the catastrophe of the housing market and all the rest of it. And it's just kind of like, was that not your party? Was your party not in charge for the last decade? But that's just it's quite amusing, isn't it? That's just forgotten. Apparently and even Freeland here, who's like in many ways like the number 2 face in the previous government, apparently all is forgiven, all is forgotten, and all is forgiven.
These photo ops are just like are enough to drive a person crazy. Show us some results. Show us some results. Enough with the photo ops. And then Francois Philippe Champagne here with his big speech. Let's play this clip first.
Mr. Speaker, it is very clear we have already chosen Canadians, and Canadians have chosen us, Mr. Speaker, to lead this nation, to build a more ambitious Canada, to build a strong Canada, to build the best economy in the G7. Together on this side of the House, we're going to build the Canada of the future, Mr. Speaker.
Sounds all so familiar. Where were you for 10 years?
Well, if he's going to shout that in Parliament, then it must be true. That's all I can think.
And if everybody
but it's a bit
stands
like
up
that
and
lawyer
applauds
just now. It's a bit like that senator who was a lawyer coming out and going on about the Clarity Act and saying things like, "Oh, I'm not even sure it's possible legally. We don't understand." It's like, you live in a democracy, little fella. If the Albertan people say they're leaving, they're leaving. Doesn't matter what the law says. Like, come on, grow up. And this kind of thing as well from Champers there, from Mr. Bubbly. What are you on about? Again, it's just like, just guff. And it's the kind of thing that you would hear from like sad old communist regimes and things like that, where like they had what they were saying just bore absolutely no relationship to
the reality
what
of
the
the
people
situation.
actually think.
The reality of
Indeed.
the situation is completely different from what Francois Philippe Champagne is spewing there, and it's just rhetoric as usual. And here's some of the reality of the situation. And this is a former Liberal MP, Dan McTeague, now critic of the Liberals for sure. And it says, for anybody listening to the mainstream media's, I won't use his words, pushing of Q1 economic growth, read this. And this is from a guy that covers economics and like the numbers. I think we might have done the story too, that the numbers look better. Economy grew by 0.5%. That's not very good growth. But then when you factor in a lot of the stuff, a lot of people were buying goods because of the tariffs. They're buying cars and heavy machinery to get ahead of the tariffs, and they jumped a staggering 16%. But the real economy underneath that is falling. And people, again, are stuck borrowing more to live, more to borrow, cutting back on everything else. Nobody wants to buy a home right now because they're unsure if they're going to keep their job. It's just bad news, and we've been covering it over and over and over again, right? And the consumers are pulling back, businesses are losing faith, investment is hollowed out, wages are rising only where government steps in, and the economy is the legacy of 10 years under Liberal mismanaged dependence and decline, and now it's, according to this guy, handed off to a banker with a carbon tax fetish, and that's going to remain to be seen where this carbon tax, industrial carbon tax, plays out in these carbon credits and the pipeline. The big question for everybody on that really cares about our economy is what's going to happen with the pipeline, because that's our biggest. I mean, people have to recognize our biggest export, our biggest contributor, bar none, to our GDP is Alberta's oil and gas. There's nothing even that comes close. And here it is. They're talking about building the strongest economy in the G7, and they're still suppressing our biggest asset. Go make that make sense to me.
Well, I actually don't know if we're going to talk about it later, but that Canadian Press obtained a briefing document. Are we going to talk about that later? Which says that they're going to basically skirt around C69, the Impact Assessment Act. That's the one that the Tories keep. Well, not just the Tories, oil companies as well, and other companies say that effectively blocks new developments. They're saying that they're going to create exceptions for that, and they're going to get around it. But there's a very interesting line in there, which is something, here it is. Projects would be assessed against Indigenous and provincial and territorial interests and on their clean growth potential. And that's what Melanie Joly said, I think it was yesterday or the day before in the House of Commons, and a few eyebrows were raised at that. She'd obviously read that document, and she was just she was reading from the hymn sheet there. But that, I mean, clean growth potential is going to be emphasized when they determine whether or not to skirt around C69. So they're going to keep C69 to block things they don't like, and then they'll use these new powers to skirt around it for clean projects. But the problem is, obviously, as we've discussed many times, it's quite hard to build a sort of export economy on clean energy exports, because nobody really wants them. It doesn't really work like that. The only way to do that is when like hydro between like BC and Washington or something like that. Obviously, that's not an export economy. That's not like a plan for exports, is it? Because you need to get it around the world.
Let me just put this to you. The way you can get oil through the pipeline clean, in their minds, will be to buy carbon credits from companies like Brookfield. You can buy a carbon credit that'll bring your dirty energy down to clean because of the carbon credits, and basically a tax. It'll be a tax on Alberta oil. You'll have to buy carbon credits to ship the dirty oil to market, and Alberta will be taxed with carbon credits that a few people will benefit greatly from. That's what I was going to say.
It sounds a lot like the Catholic Church of the medieval period, where they would sell indulgences. So you could, you could go and do your dirty deeds, whatever it is, that the sinful activity, and then you just give some money to the church, and all is forgiven. It's a little bit like that, really, isn't it?
you get your clemency there. So we got a clip here from another Conservative MP on the disclosure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of and grateful to the constituents of my hometown in Kitchener-South Hespeler. Let me tell you something about the folks in Kitchener-South Hespeler. They are honest, hardworking people who do not like a tax cheat. They remember how, back in 2016, Donald Trump shockingly refused to release his tax returns to the public. Thousands of news stories were written about it. Now, there is no law that leaders must disclose their tax returns, but the public expects that someone who seeks to lead a nation will go above and beyond the bare minimum legal requirements. Mr. Speaker, I'm sad to say we now face a similar situation in our country. This new Prime Minister refuses to give Canadians a public disclosure of his conflicts of interest. Even Justin Trudeau gave such a disclosure prior to becoming Liberal Party leader. Conservatives implore today the Prime Minister to look inside himself. Why is he taking another page out of Donald Trump's book? Why won't he disclose his conflicts? And does the answer have to do with offshore tax havens?
Before we get into that, one of the questions is like, when the American Revolution started on the Boston Tea Party for unfair taxation, like if they're going to layer carbon credits onto Alberta oil to get Alberta oil anywhere, I mean, that's not going to go over well either.
No, but I would object to the idea that the taxation on American tea was unfair, or whatever word you used, unjust. That's a long story.
Yeah, we won't get into that today.
In my view, the Englishmen who decided later on to call themselves Americans that lived in North America, they were looking for a fight, and they didn't want to pay for a war that the British had just funded to protect them. But that's a long story.
Yeah, we won't get into that today because we got lots and lots to get on with. This is I don't know how this got stuck in here. Maybe we'll come back to this. Can we come back to this Swiss Village, or maybe it's just in the middle of it? Maybe we'll just play this. This is an insane kind of like, and this is a terrible thing that where the half of a glacier down a mountain and covered a bunch of homes.
Yeah, I was listening to CBC radio about this. Can you guess what they blamed?
Yeah, of course. I know. Anyway. We do have a clip here from the Premier of Manitoba telling the media to be honest. There you go. Let's play this clip.
Starting a fire on their site.
What proof do you have that Alamos is connected to the start of the fire?
Yeah, but all the residents say it started at the mine site.
So what proof do you have?
I guess we're waiting on the investigation still, but generally, could you repeat what you just said to for my colleagues in English about your message to Lynn Lake residents?
You know, I used to be a daily news reporter, so I say this with the utmost of understanding for the pressures that everybody in this room deals with, but I really do think that responsible reporting is very important right now. Journalistic Standards and Practices book, and just making sure that you're not reporting hearsay and that stuff is double sourced before it's getting shared with the public, I think is very, very important. Not to say that that's a specific commentary on this, but just across the board. We've got a very specific message out here today. Flin Flon, a large community in the north, is on the verge of evacuation, and we're asking for people to listen to the message. We're asking for people to get ready, and we're asking Manitobans in other parts of the province to open your doors if the emergency officials come calling. So
we heard.
Rob, can you getting lots of praise out there?
I would say that he might be on the path to trying to become Prime Minister if he wasn't in the NDP. But I mean, maybe he would flip over to the Liberals or something. I don't know. But if he was to do federal politics.
Yeah. Lots of wildfires burning. We'll get to that in a bit here. We'll talk about the wildfires in a bit. RBC to require its employees back to the office 4 days a week. Oh, no.
Yeah.
You can probably look to the banks. I mean, there's some already that are starting layoffs with AI and that. You can look to the banks as being one of the first ones that are probably going to be cutting workforces as well.
Well, it's a funny profession, isn't it, finance? Because there are some people in finance that work they work hours that should actually be illegal. It should be criminal, where they literally they never leave the office and they're just obsessives, like usually in the investment departments and that kind of thing. But then you also have people in the banking world who just seem to do nothing ever. So like just layabouts that do nothing.
Yeah, and then the Online News Act, we're going to keep putting it up there. Guess what? It still exists. I know we're going. The Online News Act, Bill C-18, all the MP candidates and the new liberally elected MP here in Kelowna says it should be repealed, and yet it's still there. And you reached out to the State Department. Maybe just relay that story, how you reached out to the State Department again, and you got an answer back almost immediately. And yet we don't get answers from the PBO, almost many of the government officials here in Canada.
Yeah, the PMO, the Prime Minister's office. I don't know what it is with them. I think there's a certain haughtiness or something like that. They seem to think that because they're like in the office with the Prime Minister, theoretically, that they can just pick and choose who they respond to. But no, they're appalling. And they have been for a long time. That's the same set of press officers that ignored my phone calls and emails when Justin Trudeau came to West Kelowna. And then afterwards called me up and said, I'm really sorry. It was just an error. Like for some reason, we just didn't get your email. Like, just childish crap, the sort of thing that like a little kid would do, that kind of deception. But no, with the State Department, which, as we said yesterday, the State Department basically manages the American empire, the most powerful empire in the history of the world. And yet they still had time to respond to me. They didn't, in fairness, they didn't give me a particularly good answer, but they did they sent some, they just sent some, a link from their website, which related to Marco Rubio. But they still did a lot more than our own PMO does. And needless to say, the PMO doesn't manage any empires, doesn't manage anything really. It's just all it does is send out press releases to say that Prime Minister Carney wishes everybody a happy, whatever it is, Pakistan Independence Day or something like that.
Yeah, and according to a survey of employment, payroll and hours, Canadian employment fell by 54,000 in the month of March, and this chart does not look good for Canada's employment growth.
Terrible, yeah. I mean, this is where, I didn't have a chance to say earlier, but talking about that GDP growth, it's not being looked at as 0.5%, which is the actual growth, and it's not being looked at as, I think, 0.4% growth in GDP per capita in that 3-month period. Instead, it's being looked at as 2.2% annualized growth, which is a projection. So they look at that and they say, okay, if it stays like that for the rest of the year, then we'll have 2.2% GDP growth. So that's how it's been reported and discussed. And then people are already starting to say, like, people at the likes of, I don't know, RBC or whatever, the economists, they're already starting to say, okay, so because the Bank of Canada makes an interest rate announcement next week, they're starting to say, oh, well, maybe that's going to count as like a heating up economy. So they're not going to cut. They're going to keep the rates as they are. And when you look at things like this, employment, they're just, they're two different realities, aren't they? It's two different worlds.
I believe that they're going to have to cut, and they're likely going to cut close to a full percentage before the end of the year. They'll probably be cutting around. You can match me up to Tiff Macklin throughout time too, and go back and some of the calls. Tiff Macklin, again with that horrendous advice when the Bank of Canada rate was 0.25, says that Canada will not be raising interest rates into the foreseeable future, and then raised them unprecedentedly 19-fold. And has basically broken our economy, and Canada's greatest wealth, our housing market, and there you go. And I think
how could Trump do this to the Bank of Canada?
Yeah, how could Trump do it? Yeah, so Trump wasn't around at that point, but they must have known that he was coming. They must have known that, right? There's quite a few people out there talking that we'll get 3 more 0.25 cuts here. I don't think there's anything to be drastic, but they do need to stimulate this economy. And then these are just as an example of like how the media seems to act together. And I should have put them up there with the Bill C-18. So CTV News, This headline, COVID vaccine strongly recommended during pregnancy, Canadian doctors say. Not too far after that, the Globe and Mail runs the same thing, and then CBC, they all seem to run the same headline. And it's the same one that we saw the other day where it says, poll says this stuff. But if you go read the comments underneath these, it doesn't seem like the people are buying into it.
Misinformation in it. What does Rosie Barton think? That's the answer to the
real
question. Whoops.
Whoa.
Rosie just pushed the camera over there. Sorry, Rosie.
She reached through and just grabbed you. And this one here is a big statement for Marco Rubio. We're going to play this clip here from Marco Rubio.
Under President Trump, the United States will stand with the Jewish people. We have implemented a vigorous new visa policy that will prevent foreign nationals from coming to the United States to foment hatred against our Jewish community. We are holding international organizations and nations accountable for rhetoric against Israel that resurfaces in the manifesto of monsters like Iran and Sarah's killer. But we do see an eventual light at the end of this long tunnel of suffering. One can imagine a Middle East in which the Abraham Accords eventually reign. So thank you for the opportunity to address you.
Bit odd, some of that. That does kind of, obviously, anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment are very closely linked, a lot more closely than I think, particularly on the left, than people are willing to admit. But it does seem a little odd that this one country, which is ultimately all that Israel is at the end of the day, it's just a country, it's a member of the United Nations, or so, for it to be given this special privilege, this special protection, is a little bit strange. And that's obviously going to, I feel like that's just going to make the protests and all the rest of it even more intense, because people are going to feel like it's not fair and that it's like a double standard. So I'm not sure about the wisdom of this policy from the Trump admin.
And then speaking of Donald Trump, he put out another tweet on China this morning. He said, and maybe I won't read the whole thing, but he said, no more Mr. Nice Guy. Like, I don't know when has he been Mr. Nice Guy in the tariffs? I'm not sure if anybody.
I think it's that taco thing has got to him, hasn't it? Trump always chickens out.
Yeah.
He doesn't like it. He doesn't like that acronym. So he's trying to push back on the taco claims.
Yeah, you're saying that they gave that break to China, and then all of a sudden they say China's violating the agreement. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. There's a speech here from AfD leader Alice Weidel speech in Hungary there. Let's play this clip from her.
We are patriots, and we stand steadfast on the side of freedom. We fight for free speech, the cornerstone of all freedom. We fight for secure borders and law and order. We fight for the safety for our kids and next generations. We fight for sovereign nations and the next generation. We fight for the right to be free citizens and free nations. And last but not least, we fight for peace. In the Ukraine, with Russia, and we fight for good relations to our neighbors and to the USA. Let's make Europe great again together. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
I was told by experts that she's the next Hitler. Doesn't really look very Hitlerian to me there.
She's from my mother's homeland. My mother and father escaped the Hungarian Revolution. During the Hungarian Revolution, when university students rose up against the Russians, And they fought, my mother said, during Free America radio playing. The Allies are on the way. And of course, the Allies were never on their way. And then when the Russian tanks rolled in, obviously it crushed the rebellion quite quickly. And she was part of the many Hungarian refugees that ended up here in Canada. Yes, in 1950s. Yeah. The revolution, Ian. The Hungarian Revolution.
That was the second wave, because there was a previous one just before the beginning of the Second World War. I think 1939, 1938, something like that. There were some Jews managed to escape Hungary and come to Canada as well. So there's quite a strong relationship, isn't there, between Hungary and Canada in that way?
Yeah, and then that Orban seems to be a pretty good friend of Trump as well.
Yeah, he's also, he's been accused of being very chummy with Putin as well. But the Hungarians rely on German gas, I believe, and don't really have much of an alternative. So it's kind of
Russian gas. Yeah.
Yeah. What did I say? Sorry, did I say something else?
German gas. The Germans don't have any gas.
No, the Germans used to as well. The Germans used to depend on Russian gas, but no, the Hungarians depend on it, and they're not. They weren't willing to amputate their own legs like the Germans have done and just destroy their industry.
The only German gas left is inside the bellies of the German politicians. That's a free comedy show. Let's move on to BC and local news here, and this is a big story here in Kelowna. And this follows on the heels of the pediatric department, that message that we played yesterday from the doctor saying that the pediatric ward is definitely in trouble. Now it says there's a growing crisis. These are a bunch of doctors saying that the Kelowna General Hospital's maternity care is facing a collapse as well. And the alarms continue to be sounded at KGH in the early stages of the 6-week closure of the hospital's pediatric unit, which has caused doctors to speak up. More healthcare professionals have gone public with grave concerns about the state of affairs at KGH. And remember, all the doctors suppressed, all of a sudden they're now starting to sound the alarms. 9 members of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at KGH released a statement this morning to share urgent concerns about the growing crisis in maternity care in the central Okanagan. The doctors say the safety of patients and newborns is at serious risk if action isn't taken immediately by government decision makers. And that's due to a critical shortage of family physicians willing or able to provide this care. Worsened by the failure to recruit replacement, our hospital is facing collapse of its primary maternity care as early as June 1st, 2025.
And they're talking about the potential for permanent harm to a mother or baby.
Yeah.
If that happens, is that what it's going to take? Often it seems like that, doesn't it? With any sort of government, any sort of government sector that's not working, it often takes a tragedy, doesn't it? Like a train crash or something. It's like, oh, right, we better fix the trains then. But I mean, it's many voices now. So we've had that woman who went on. She's a pediatric doctor, wasn't she? Who went on Instagram. And we've got this. We've got somebody coming to us from pediatric dentistry as well, trying to say that that's also in a bit of a shambles. I mean, this just looks like it's like a real scandal ready to explode, isn't it?
And you and I talked about it just recently as well. The NDP government seems focused on politics. They think by advertising in the United States to get doctors and nurses here from the U.S., that they'll leave higher pay, come here for half the pay and twice the tax, higher taxation, because of Donald Trump as president of the United States. It's just silliness. They'll come here for economics. Like, that's how you get people to come. Are the economics better? Is the work stuff better? Like, they're having to leave their family, their life, and everything. And you're thinking you're going to convince them of that. You need to figure out different ways. You need to convince people because of the economics. British Columbia is not in great shape. And it's the policies that have put us here. Canada is not in great shape. It's the policies of the past 10 years that put us here. You need to start fixing the economy. You need to start fixing the economy. You bring in unprecedented immigration that's crippled our healthcare system, crippled our housing sector, and these people that you brought in, supposedly they were bringing in high-skilled people, and nowhere near that. They brought in a bunch of people that we're actually heavily dependent on the system.
Yeah. Tragedy, isn't it, really? I mean, this doctor situation, why can't we just train more doctors? I don't think it, like you say, I completely agree. It's not a realistic strategy, is it, to try and poach doctors from the United States, where doctors are paid the highest salaries in the world. And I think it's not just doctors, it's also nurses and other medical professionals, because of how much money is in the American health system. Can't we just train more doctors? It's like, sometimes I think they speak about doctors as if they're like NFL football players, like as if it's only a very rare, tiny proportion of the population that can become a doctor. Like anybody with like an IQ higher than 110 or 5 or something like that can be a doctor. It's not like not like they're 1 in a billion people. Just train them. Like, why can't we just get them trained and like expand the schools?
And here's the thing: I know for a fact a NICU nurse, a very experienced NICU nurse, doesn't work at KGH because of the vaccine thing, and is now working just in clinics. And I also know many young nurses that go to the U.S. to make more money because they're paying off their student loans and that. They go down there as a traveling nurse. So trying to say that you're going to convince them to come this way is just bollocks. Like, train more. Like, I'm using one of your words. They're bollocks. It doesn't make any sense. Like, get rid of these vaccine mandates and actually figure out a way to train people and move people up. Help people instead of just being the roadblock. The Liberal government and the NDP continue to put their own politics in the way of almost everything instead of the economy.
And the problem I think a lot of people have is that there's always someone else or something else to blame. And as I've just turned my face over here to the YouTube, as Brett says there, it's always Trump's fault, isn't it? Every time. And I mean, fair enough. Trump's been a pretty bad dude for us here in Canada, and I can listen to that all day long, particularly the way he's undermined the alliance. But he's not responsible for things like this, is he? But it's like, whenever something goes wrong with the BC NDP, it's always somebody else's fault, isn't it? And usually Trump's.
Yeah, so there's quite a few doctors, the 9 doctors, the KGH Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology signed this. And you can go on Kelowna now and you can read the full story. We've reached out to Interior Health for comment. They have a staff of 14, 15 communications people. It's almost impossible to get a comment from them. I don't know what they do there.
Why don't they make them doctors? Stick them into a doctor training program. It'd be a lot more useful than responding or not responding to emails.
So we reached out because don't forget the BC NDP also did advertising in London. Remember that when they were putting up billboards? You broke that story. I think one of the few outlets in Canada to do that story. They were spending money to advertise in London to get doctors. And we reached out to ask the BC NDP what they got for that and how much they spent. They just couldn't find the numbers. They didn't have them.
Yeah, well, we weren't tracking that. I think that's what they said, isn't it? Which is kind of a massive
odd, right?
Indictment.
Kind of odd. We know they're tracking it because they did provide numbers for this app that they created. They manipulate stats. I mean, I did very well in stats in school. I know you can manipulate stats, but this is a basic question. How much did you spend advertising in London for these doctors, and how many did you get? And then the same thing goes for how much are you spending in the United States, and what are you getting from it? Not like, oh, there's people interested, because that's nothing. There's nothing until you have people coming here.
I think for people of a pessimistic persuasion like myself, what David Eby did there is enough to make you want to jump out the window. Where he promoted and set up a press conference, and he promoted it as like a major announcement about doctor recruitment or something like that. And it was all the fireworks were going off. And then he said, we've had whatever it was, 4,000 inquiries from the United States. It's like, inquiries. Wow. Okay. When you see things like that, you just think, all right, we're doomed. We're finished.
It could have been a bot farm that filled it in 2. They could have said, what's the pay? What's the pay? Because that would have been a question. Because I'm sure, they think it's just like, how do I get away from Trump? The questions would be more so, what do I get paid? What's the taxation? and and where do I get to live, right? And how much is a house? You know, like in Texas right now, what you can buy for $1 million in Texas will blow people away, like compared to what you can buy here in Kelowna for $1 million. Go check
Never
it out.
mind how much sunshine you'll get.
Go on Realtor.com and put it in there and see what kind of house you can get for $1 million in Texas, like Austin, Texas, not a small, you know, Lubbock, Texas, or something like that. Go find out. Go find out. Stop listening to media that tends to want to lie to you. Anyway, wildfire triggers evacuation in BC's Peace River region. That's a photo we took a number of years ago. That was from the Highway 97 connector fire. I took that photo myself. I'm going to take some credit for that photo. It's a great photo. We have lots of video and photos like that. The Peace River Regional District in northeastern BC has issued evacuation for properties threatened for an out-of-control wildfire. So across the west, wildfires are burning, right? So
it's like the north as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of each province, actually.
Yeah. In 1980, I think it was, 81, I worked for Alberta Forestry Service as a young guy. My job was what they called, I can't remember the name of the job, hotshot. And they called me a hotshot driver. So I would drive supplies out to fires in a Ranger truck and to drive through fires. And that was that time, much of north of High Level Alberta was on fire. And you would drive down these massive cut lines and bringing supplies to, you know, the crews out there fighting wildfires. You ain't seen nothing.
Pretty scary, pretty dangerous job, isn't it?
You ain't seen nothing until you drive through a wildfire. That's, you know, and there's no fighting those wildfires when they get that big. It's thick brush, and thick brush, and it's crazy. But you got to drive through it to get the stuff to where you need to. Thank you for the comment there, Kenzie. Yeah, we got lots of great photos of wildfire fighting, and that we got lots when we were on the line and stuff like that. So, yeah. So wildfire season well on its way, and then where's the mitigation? That's what's supposed to be happening. Why are there still, like I look out the window here, and I look on the west side of Kelowna here. There's still a bunch of pines hanging over people's homes. Why? Why is the question? David Eby put out a thing there, and it didn't age very well. The U.S. International Trade confirmed what we've been saying all along. Trump's tariffs are unfair, unjustified, and it only hurt people on both sides of the border. And that lasted how long? A couple hours? Because then another court said that he could go ahead with his tariffs. So,
well, until it's going to be a back and forth, and for once, that Caroline Levitt, whatever her name is, has said something true and accurate, which is it's probably going to go to the Supreme Court. So we're all gonna have to wait and see.
Yeah. So there you go.